I will be chairing this session as program leader, and we have two moderators, Adrienne Martin and Jeremy Hager. Adrienne will moderate the first sub-session, and Jeremy will moderate the second sub-session. And we have 5 external speakers, and I'm really happy and proud that they have accepted to be a speaker on this session. We have Rolando Serra from KTA in Costa Rica, and he will talk about contribution of agroforestry to face future challenges and balance intensification sustainability of coffee and cocoa smallholder farmers. Next will be Angela Mckindy from the Nelson Mandela African Institute of Agriculture. I'm not pronouncing that right, I think. But she will be talking about smallholders and agriculture, the work done at her institute, or a perspective from Tanzania. Next will be Blessings Chinsinga from Malawi. He will talk about the future of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa, I should say. And after that, we will have Kolawole Adebayo from Nigeria. And he is from the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta. And he will be talking about the future of African smallholder farming, in short. And the last speaker, invited speaker, is Jibrin from Bayero University, Nigeria, and he will be talking about improving the productivity of smallholder farmers in semi-arid region of West Africa. Then we may have a very short break, and then we will go to the second sub-session. In that sub-session, there will only be one paper presented. It will be presented by me and my NRI colleague Laxmi. And we will be talking about sustainable agricultural intensification of smallholder family farms in the tropics, the views and roles of NRI and partners. And this will be followed by 30-45 minutes of discussion moderated by Jeremy. So I think we should not further delay and move to the first speaker, and I will give the floor to Adrienne now to moderate this and stop sharing, of course.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Adrienne. Yeah. Before I finish, I should say, ask everyone to please mute your mics if you are not talking. And then if you talk, of course, you have to unmute it, because if your mic is unmuted, there may be a lot of background noise, and that will distort the meeting. Thank you very much.
That's good. Thank you. Well, for our first session, as Jon has explained, we're welcoming 5 speakers. To say that all these speakers are from partner institutions of the FANCY programme. And actually most of them, if not all, have current or previous collaboration with NRI. Now, the 5 speakers were invited to reflect on the future position and relevance of smallholder farmers in the South, and were set some quite challenging questions. Will there still be smallholders in 2020? And does future agriculture need smallholder farmers? What will be the future challenges for smallholders, and what solutions will be available? Should our focus even be on smallholder farmers? Are they part of the problem, or are they the solution? And how do we manage the potential conflict between the needs of smallholder farmers versus society in general, in terms of our need for food security, environmental sustainability, and livelihoods? So these were some challenging questions, and we're looking forward to what the contributors have to say about them. So each speaker will make a short presentation of around 12 minutes each, followed by a few minutes of brief questions. We will stick to time. I know there's not much time for discussion, but there will be another opportunity for discussion right at the end of the session. For the audience, if you have questions or comments, please type them in the chat. I'll monitor those and then present them to the speakers when they've finished speaking. So thank you. I think our first speaker is Dr. Rolando Cerda of Cartier. And as Yoni said, he's going to talk to us about the contribution of agroforestry to facing future challenges in this area. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will do this presentation based on our experience mainly in Latin America and especially Central America. First, it's important to mention the importance of these two crops, coffee and cacao, in this region. In Latin America and Caribbean, we have more than 5.4 million of hectares of coffee and 1.6 million of hectares of cacao. And in Central America, about 80 to 90% of these plantations are under shade, which means different types of agroforestry systems, from simple agroforestry systems, as you can see here on the right, to highly diversified systems. And we estimate that more than 80% of these plantations are in hands of smallholder farmers. This agroforestry can produce products, coffee, cacao, of course, but also fruits and timber and other products for the benefits of thousands of families. In a direct mode, produce incomes and products for domestic consumption for the families who grow directly cocoa or coffee in their own farms, but also provide indirect benefits for other thousands of families because it's a source of income for farmers who go to work in this plantation, especially harvesters. However, smallholder farmers especially are facing several types of challenges currently. One of the most important is climate change, because we know that temperatures will increase by 2 degrees in the future. And also there will be changes in rainfall distribution. At your left, you have two maps for the projections of suitability to grow coffee and cacao in Central American region, where you can see several colors, yellow, orange, or reds, which implies alarms for the farmers, because we will have impacts on the physiology of the crops and therefore on the diminution of yields. Other challenges are the fertility of soils, losses due to pests and diseases, the prices, and the cost of productions. Many farmers in the region have old and unproductive plantations, so they will need to do rehabilitation or renovation of their systems. So as you can see, we have important challenges to face and to overcome. And if we don't do that, we don't help the farmers, well, we will have more vulnerability in these regions, and incomes will decrease, and also food security will be compromised. So it's important that we help these farmers for their own good, but also for us, because all of us like chocolate and coffee, right? We believe that agroforestry can be part of the solutions and contribute to overcome these challenges, because these systems provide different types of ecosystem services. Here I will show some examples. Very important, the provisioning service, because agroforestry can provide coffee, cacao, fruits, timber, and other products. Here in this figure, you have this indicator of family benefit, which is the cash flow of the systems, plus the value of the domestic consumption, which is not always taken into account, but it's very important to reflect the real and overall contribution of agroforestry systems. We did an extensive research in Central America, where we classified cacao systems in 3 types, C1, C2, and C3. I want to highlight the type C3. You can see in this small figure is a diversified system. And we take into account the contribution of cacao, which is more cash flow, more than $1,000 per hectare per year. And we assume this contribution of agroforestry products, like $2,000. We will have around $3,000 per hectare per year if we manage well this diversity in the system, which is very good for smallholder farmers. Other examples of regulating services in soil and in carbon biomass. We did research with coffee in Central America, comparing full sun coffee, simple shade agroforestry systems, and highly diversified agroforestry systems, as you can see in the figures. And we found that with more diversification in these systems, we can have, for instance, more potassium in the soils, which is important for the fertility, and this will mean less need of external inputs for farmers. So it's important to face one of the challenges that I mentioned about soil. Here is a figure on the contribution to mitigation in this case, because agroforestry systems can sequester carbon, as you know. And comparing full sun with diversified shade coffee, you can see that the carbon stock in the diversified shade coffee is more than the double of the full sun coffee. So farmers could have advantages on their prices or even sell these regulating services, and therefore also contribute to a global problem for the mitigation of climate change. So that were some examples of ecosystem services, but of course farmers will want to increase yields for their incomes and savings. So this desire will imply in many cases intensification of the agronomic management, and this could have compromises or trade-offs with sustainability. Here in our research, we use the variables regarding shade canopy, like species, shade cover, density of trees, etc., as proxy indicators of sustainability, because they can provide ecosystem services. Here in this figure, we are doing a relationship between plant species and cacao yield, to try to visualize some trade-offs, comparing these three types of cacao systems. Cacao types C2 and C3 are similar in their structure, but different in the agronomic management. But cacao C2 present trade-offs, while cacao C3 have more unintensified management and still does not present trade-off. And we found that this is because in this C3 farmers do some kind of intensification, but in an adequate manner with good techniques. So this is a good indicator that a balance between intensification and sustainability can be possible if management is adequate. Here I have another example with coffee. This is from a very recent study with the Greenwich University, where we are comparing the results among different types of coffee agroforestry systems. In this figure, you have the yield of coffee in function of the cost. Cost is also an indicator of intensification of the systems, because it implies all the activities that farmers do. And is differentiated by the level of shade cover of the groups of coffee plantations that we classified. Here you can see that in this first two levels of costs, let's say low and medium cost, we cannot note clearly differences among the response of yield with different shade cover. But when we do more intensification, let's say more costs, like in this case, more $1,100 per hectare, we note that with more than 55% shade cover, we could have a trade-off because the yield response is lower than the other cases. So based on these findings, there appears that the compatibility between intensification and shade with moderate shade cover can be possible. With shade cover less than 55%, we will be good, and farmers could do agroforestry and could intensify their systems. And that shade level that we see permits to have at least more than 4 species in the systems, which may generate other goods and other service for the farmers and for the society. So to mitigate these trade-offs and maybe achieving synergies, farmer will need to make some gradual changes in their systems, no? And our duty is to guide them as technicians and scientists to do this, to do better management of these agroforestry systems, but also implies, for instance, better varieties, no, of coffee and cacao. So I will take the opportunity to show what we are doing in Katie to contribute to these aims, no? In Katie, we have these important coffee and cacao germ plants collections with in coffee more than 2,000 accessions, and in cacao more than 100 accessions in our collection, which are the base for our breeding programs. We are developing new hybrids of coffee and new clones of cacao. No, we already have these clones in the region, but constantly we are trying to produce new better materials with high production under agroforestry systems, tolerant to pests and diseases, and excellent quality. No, and it's important to conserve these wild accessions because in the future we can use them and can be the future of coffee and cacao. It is also important to continue doing research in centers like Katia and other centers, but also with farmers. In Katia, we have a coffee essay, which is about 20-year-old, with a lot of results to share with farmers. And we are beginning with a cacao agroforestry system essay, where we were trying to test clones, different types of shade and management. But it's also important to continue doing research in the berry farms of the smallholder farmers, no? Because we can have more information at different scales and try to traduce this in better recommendations. It's also important to take advantage on technology. No? We are trying to advance, not in traditional ways to measure agroforestry systems. Now we want to use and we are developing this technology using drones, no, to take images of the systems, then to translate the data of the trees to softwares to simulate shade, like this Shade Motion is a free software of Katia. And this dispositive is very useful to do the diagnostic of the systems and then to share this with farmers in workshops and therefore help them to make decisions on how to move to better diversified systems or simple systems with agroforestry. No? And finally, we think it's important to translate this to farmers through teaching materials. No? Traditionally, we have different kinds of teaching materials. In Katia, we developed this kind of cartoon materials. But our next step, and we are already working on that, is to produce digital animations. No? Therefore, especially young farmers, no, can download these digital animations in the duration of 3-5 minutes short videos to show them how to do better practices. No? So it would be in hands of the smallholder farmers and therefore try to do better technical assistance through technology. No? We can use platforms like Cacao Mobile or Coffee Cloud to promote this, which are already available. So that was my presentation, and I invite you to look for more information of cacao and coffee and what we do in the web of Katia and this Mesoamerica scientific platform that we are part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rolando. That was most interesting, and I think we've learned a great deal. A couple of questions in the chat, which I'll just let you know quickly if we can respond to those. Firstly, from Yoni, he asks, in your breeding endeavours, are you integrating stakeholder perceptions, the perceptions of farmers or processors or consumers?
Yes. When we do our breeding program, first, of course, we need to identify promising materials, no? So we have the feedback from smallholders to industry and to chefs. No, we see what they are interested in. No, especially things about quality, for instance, but other indicators that we need to develop. So we do like a set of criteria to try to achieve. Then based on that, we select the promising materials and start doing the process to generate new materials.
Very interesting, thank you. Another question from Phil Stevenson. The natural enemies of insect pests often benefit from shade in agroforestry plantations, but whether this leads to improved pest suppression depends on many other factors. He asks, is any work going on which looks at the impact on pests and beneficials in your work?
Yes, we have especially research on the regulation of pests and diseases in coffee agroforestry systems. No? So it's true that there can be contrasting effects of shade. In some cases, shade can promote and can benefit the pests and diseases, but in other cases, it can be detrimental, which is the thing that we are looking for. No? But again, it depends on the way you are managing your system. No? We have some similar findings that if you have, let's say, less than 55% shade cover, then you will have a good balance of most of the ecosystem services, including pests and diseases regulation. No? So it depends on the management, especially on the regulation of shade, which is not, which farmers unfortunately don't do always, no? But we need to orient them when and how to prune this timber or fruit trees, no, in order to benefit the production and disfavor the pests and diseases.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid we'll have to stop there and go on to the next presentation. There are a few more questions, but I hope that maybe some of those can be raised later on. So thank you very much again.
Okay.
And the next presenter is Angela Mckindy from Nelson Mandela African Institution of Science and Technology. She works on agroecology and sustainable food system strategies and is interested in field crop pest management. And she's talking about smallholders in agriculture, a perspective from Tanzania. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, the fancy team, for inviting me and for this conference. And as introduced, I'll speak about smallholders. I hope I am audible.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. So I'll speak about smallholder and agriculture and the perspective from Tanzania, where I am and where our research works have been taking place. So, wow, my slides are not moving.
Perhaps try to click with your mouse rather than using the cursor.
Yes, I am. Okay. So to answer the question whether there will be smallholder farmers by 2050, my answer is yes. And I'm seeing this in 3 different perspectives. One is that with the efforts that has been taken now with research works, with stakeholders, efforts on sustainability in agriculture, there will be farmers who are really adopting and who are influencing sustainability in agriculture. And that will be a very good thing, taking advantage of them and their efforts towards sustainable agriculture, maintaining biodiversity and things like that. But for sure, based also on the fact that we have less capacity, less expertise, we have new problems coming which need our processing, we will have really a challenge with capacity. So we may suffer from reaching as many smallholders as possible. So we'll have others left behind suffering the impacts of unsustainable farming. And of course, the trend now is there's a huge now scenario for conventional farming, which is detrimental to environment, And I don't see this fading up quite completely, but it needs effort. So taking 29 years from now, I still see smallholders existing with these three perspectives. So going forward in my presentation, I'll talk about the challenging future for smallholder farmers. And to answer the question, I'll bring in the context of what we have been doing, the research works that we have been performing, and of course, with involvement of smallholder farmers. So it goes without saying that we have prominent challenges facing smallholders, and especially in the sector of pest management, that we have a realm of new pests, increasing incidences and infestations, a huge crop losses and things like that. But we have extreme events that also facilitate pests and diseases. But we have soil deterioration, which is also causing less resilience to crops, and so being prone to attack by pests. So what we have been doing is working with smallholder farmers in ways that are so responsive enough to help find out research results that are very informative, but yet engaging farmers. So we start with understanding problems together and understanding the ways forward, or the means to combat problems together. Here you will see that we are doing a training, we're practicing on how to make plant extracts with farmers, but also we're holding trainings to make people understand pests, but also as a way of controlling insect pests, we have also to acknowledge the fact that the ecosystem contains also natural or beneficial insects, such as pollinators and natural enemies. So it is our mandate to inform farmers, to inform ourselves together, and understand how best to control pests while taking care of non-target organisms such as those. But after understanding the problems, after understanding the ways forward, we need to plan and experiment. So we have been doing this, and we see they're very important, and including smallholder farmers really helps to bring things together. So when we do experiments, we know that there are some experiments that really cannot be done by smallholder farmers. But experimenting isn't only going to the lab, but what we do is to get informed problems or research questions. And this comes from where the problems are, where the problems emanate. And this is into the smallholders' perspectives. So having them on board and letting us understand the real problems through their own observations, through their experiences, gives us a very good way of investigating in a way that we can bring out responsive outputs that are helpful back to the farmers. So we have informed problems, but also have a very responsive investigation that altogether brings us very good results that are useful. This is an example of experiments that have been done on farmers' fields. So after we have our trainings, we have planned our experiments, we have planned our designs, farmers understand what they have to do, they treat their crops, and then we see how the treatments work in the field in terms of pests abundance, natural enemies or beneficial insects, but also how yield is enhanced, how damage is reduced. And this is a result of farmers' fields on individual plots and demonstration plots. So farmers do everything, and researchers and farmers do both evaluate and come out with results. And afterward, in the top right of my slide is an output of a focus group discussion. After 2 years of working with farmers on pest management, they bring out the future options. What should we do, or what should be done in order to promote use of pesticide plants, for example? There are very good information out there which are aired by farmers, And these are good research questions for researchers for master PhD studies, but they give concrete feedbacks to farmers and ways forward. So this has helped us so much to have timely information and a way to plan for our collaborative future, but also to generate other research topics for further explorations, but interventions, how to strategize well on interventions. This is just a simple, this is just a short description of how farmers participate in botanicals. They harvest, and together we advise each other on how to dry the plant materials in the grinding, and lastly storing the powders ready for the season. So that was the first part of a challenging future. But the second realm of challenging future is actually coping with the fast global technologies. While we were thinking of harvesting and processing and grinding, some other technologies are just fast and are just more sophisticated. So integrating these two things is actually a challenge that smallholders will face and that require interventions. But we have issues of knowledge ownership and how knowledge is being shared across, from researchers who know they know better, and from farmers who think they also know a lot of things and they have a lot to offer. But also now in an agroecological perspective, now providing context-specific technologies. What works in Tanzania could not be the same as what works probably in Sudan. Therefore, the way to maintain this and to make sure that we have not one shoe fits all solutions, but responsive solutions that could really handle different problems from different contexts. But another challenge that I am seeing is defining the roadmap, defining where we need to go. Now we are talking about a huge population, a diverse population with different contexts, with different challenges. These are smallholder farmers. How do we strategize? Like, this is a one way, this is the road. We are seeing commercialization in our project, that this could be one of the things. Commercializing knowledge and products at local level would help to actually motivate more innovations, but also to bring back benefits of adopting the technologies. So what we are doing going forward is, first of all, to just build capacity. Here in the middle, in the picture in the middle is an online, it's a virtual conference, it's a community of practice meeting where we have a number of experts, stakeholders, plus farmers. This is a group of farmers who are following, and they will have a chance to also give their ideas, their findings, their perceptions, and their plans and their views. Therefore, whenever we have the capacity of this way, farmers' awareness, but their own visibility and the confidence, they will help in practical implementation of whatever actions that are given, whatever research outputs that are obtained from the research. So again, with that, we have also sharing knowledge, but commercialization, such as commercializing the set of grants, products, and services, networking, and of course, in the last picture, in the lower picture is the plants known as the Frosia. This was formerly just a banana field, but after understanding the benefits of using botanicals, these farmers have planted. So we have a number of plant species. So knowing that they're important, we also see commercialization, domestication as one of the things. So this is something that going forward, coupled with research, with technology put into these efforts, we can have smallholders in 2050, but in a different level. And so thank you very much, and sincere thanks to partners, the University of Greenwich. I've seen my professors in the call, and the Mckindy, which has been funding most of this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. That was really, really interesting. And I found particularly what you described about farmers' participation in helping to design responsive research extremely interesting and important. And also, I think your point about fast-moving technologies, I think we quite often forget what a challenge that is, particularly the mechanisms for sharing such knowledge. Now, you have a lot of questions. We haven't got time for all of them, but you might be able to respond to some of them in the chat. There's a set of questions around the participation of farmers. Do actually farmers participate in the design of the experiments on the farms? And also when you're discussing research priorities with farmers, do different groups of farmers come up with different suggestions?
Yes, so I should have mentioned that most of this work we've been doing in a farmer research network sort of design, recognizing farmers as the center of the research and as the people whose ideas are most valued. So when we want to do experiments, they don't need to be as sophisticated, requiring complex methodologies as they would be done by a typical researcher. Mm-hmm. So there are ways of designing experiments in the field that a farmer can also participate in and can actually do it by him or herself. I'll give you an example of a field trial where we want to test different species of plant extracts on beans. It is just easy for every farmer to have 2 or 3 or 4 plots that one plot is sprayed with, say, synthetic pesticide, another one sprayed with one plant extract and another one with another extract like that. And afterwards, the farmer will just say which one is the best. If I want to, now we can also add some other information like the number of plants, the number of pests, a certain pest, a number of beneficial insects, counting every week, just like that. So it is something that is easy, it is doable whenever we have a plan. Mm-hmm. And another question about whether every farmer comes with a different opinion. Of course, in the beginning, we have those scattered minds, but we can start, say, we planned that our problem is pests. And this year, we are focusing on common beans. And the pest of interest, actually, the most disturbing insect pest is aphids. Mm. And then we go through the experiment to the end. And in the end, in the feedback meetings, we'll be discussing about that. And we're going forward. Let's say a typical example is we went further up to the end and we know, okay, now the plant which works best for aphids is A. But we have anthracnose disease. So what do we do about it? Maybe we'll go on with anthracnose, but we are also going to check aphids. Therefore, we have different mindsets. We have different ideas, just like normally how when many people come together, they have different opinions, but we have the roadmap, we have the target, we have the focus of the research. So it becomes easy when everything is done with all people from the beginning to the end. Then we don't have scattered minds all together when going forward.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we haven't got time to cover any more questions right now, but Angela, if you look in the chat, you'll see some very interesting questions for you, which you might be able to respond to. So,
okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks again. Now we'll go on to Dr. Blessings Jinsinga from Chancellor College, University of Malawi, where he's Deputy Director of the Centre for Social Research. And he's going to talk to us on the future of smallholders in Southern Africa.
Thank you very much. My presentation this afternoon will be on the future of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa, but I will pay particular attention on the Malawi experiences. And as you can see from the outline of the presentation, I'll begin by looking at the key messages and briefly look at the context of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa. And then I will highlight key issues.
I think you have to share your screen with us.
Share your screen.
We don't see your presentation at the moment.
Yeah, sorry. So I was saying that this is how I'm going to proceed. I will briefly state the key messages, then look at the context of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa, and then zero on the Malawi experiences. In particular, I will look at what are the key issues that smallholder farmers are facing, and then try to suggest some policy considerations that we have to look at as we think about the future of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa. And then I will conclude. Basically, my message is very simple. The future for smallholder farmers in Southern Africa, for me, is quite bleak. And holding everything constant, I would argue that most of them would be on the verge of extinction by 2050. Yet at the same time, I think it's very important to appreciate that smallholder farmers are a necessary evil for the future of Southern African countries, because they are a key part of possibilities of inclusive transformation of these countries. And our argument generally is that policy remedies do exist that would help smallholder farmers to be an integral part of the future that we are talking about. However, the challenge really is the evolving political economy that makes it very difficult, in my view, for these smallholder farmers to survive. However, when we are talking about these smallholder farmers, I think what would be important is to recognize that we are not dealing with a homogeneous entity. There are different types of smallholder farmers. So we should avoid taking a one-size-fits-all approach. But when we look at the entire Southern Africa, it's very fair to say that the region is facing similar problems. The farms are very small. The amount of unusable arable land is getting diminished. And at the same time, the population is growing rapidly. You know as much as I do that smallholders are a dominant phenomenon globally, and it is estimated that 75% of farms around the world are less than 2 hectares. In Southern Africa, smallholder farmers make 80% of the total farming population. And you know as much as I do that agriculture is very, very important in Southern Africa. But at the same time, it is very important to recognize that there are different levels of the importance of agriculture in the economies of Southern Africa. So on average, agriculture contributes about 15% to the total GDP of these countries, but they range from 3% to about 40% in Botswana and Mozambique, respectively. In terms of land ownership, as you can see, the land per capita holding is very small, as low as 0.1 hectares in Botswana to about 0.3 hectares in most of the southern African countries, of course, with the exception of Mozambique and Zambia. And what we are saying is that as we are thinking about the future of smallholder farmers, it is important to think about them in the context of the so-called mega trends. You know as much as I do that we are experiencing unprecedented demographic change. Africa is experiencing the birth of middle class. There is a revolution in information technology, and some African countries are experiencing rapid urbanization. And there is some shift in terms of the nature of demand for food. But at the same time, there are also some relevant downstream trends that are very important to take into account when we are looking at the future of smallholder farmers. And in particular, I want to focus on the apparent global interest in the available farmland in Africa. You know as much as I do that we've been talking about the global land rush in the past few years following the sharp rise in food prices in the first decade of the millennium. Now, coming to Malawi, it's very important to emphasize that the land ownership is very, very small. At the moment, we are talking about 0.33 hectares per capita. 76% of our farmers cultivate on less than a hectare, and about 30% are essentially landless because they are cultivating on less than half a hectare. But what is very key to note is that the productivity is very low, despite the apparent increase in the use of organic fertilizer. And what is very key is that about 42% of farmers work on lands that cannot respond to the existing agricultural technologies for intensification. And this is a very big challenge going forward. When we look at the nature of the population, 2/3 of the population is under 24 years of age, and 45% is under 15 years of age. Agriculture, however, still remains the major employer. It employs about 70% of Malawians. The industry has, on the other hand, been declining. Yeah, it only employs 8%, which is a characteristic of the structural transformation theories that we know about development. However, there is some glimmer of hope. The service industry is growing. It is estimated at 20%. But this is not something to celebrate about, because what it basically denotes is the fact that Malawi is rapidly turning into an unproducing and basically a vending economy, which doesn't bode well for the future of smallholder farmers. So the question becomes, what are the key trends that are threatening the future of smallholder farmers in Malawi? Basically, we identify three major factors. The first one is about what we are calling local land grabs. Of course, we can talk about the international land grabs, but what is developing in the last few years is what I would call local land grabs, whereby white-collar employees are grabbing land in the periphery of the major cities and pushing smallholder farmers out of their land. So we are having a new group of farmers owning, on average, between 5 to 10 hectares of land. And as a result of that, the average per capita of about 78% of the population of landholding has diminished to about 0.59 hectares. So that is the first point. The second point is about the dominance of subsidies. I think what is important to stress in the Malawi context is that for the last 20 years now, Malawi's agriculture has not survived without subsidies. And what is happening basically is that a huge share of the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture is taken up by subsidy. For example, this year's budget, as much as 78% went to subsidies. And yet we know that the best return to investment in agriculture arises from research and development, farmer extension, and infrastructure, especially roads and electricity in rural areas. So you see, if the 78% is taken up by the subsidies, then there is very little that remains for these key levers of agricultural development. The third factor is what I call the externally driven policy frameworks that are basically biased towards large-scale farming. We have what we call the Malawi Growth and Development Strategy 3, the National Export Strategy, and the newly launched Malawi 2063, which is, I think, a replica of Africa Agenda 23. So basically, if you look at the policy positions of these dominant policy frameworks, they are basically marginalizing smallholder farmers, because the argument really is that agriculture is not a public sector activity. It is a private sector activity. However, when it comes to practice, there is still a huge attraction toward smallholder farmers, especially through subsidies. But given what I've already said, what this does is simply encourages incentives for populist measures that distribute rather than invest public resources. So the question for us is whether the fate of smallholder farmers is actually sealed. What we argue is that not really. It depends on the robustness of policy measures that can be put in place. And especially given the stage at which we are as developing countries, smallholders are bound to remain an integral part of the transformation agenda going forward. I mean, you know as much as I do, there are lots and lots of justifications for smallholder farmers. They are efficient, they are more equitable, they generate considerable local multipliers, and they are basically gender sensitive because the majority of the work at the small farm level is done by women. But as I've already pointed out, the dominant narrative out there is that if we are to deal with the problem of chronic hunger and food shortage in developing countries, then the answer is not the smallholder farmer. The answer is a large-scale farmer, because the smallholder farmer belongs to the yesterday economy. And these basically reflected in the policy discourses and frameworks that I've talked about. But what we are saying in this particular presentation is that there could still be a future for smallholder farmers if we consider 3 sets of policy measures. The first set of policy measures about those policies that talk about stepping up, creating a stable macroeconomy, providing the public goods that we are talking about that would help to spearhead smallholder agricultural development. Stepping up policies, talking about the promotion of non-farm economy so that there is an interface between the farm and the off-farm economy, including even migration. But for a country like Malawi, migration is not an answer because the country is not urbanizing at a very rapid rate. And ultimately, if you are stuck, then you have a set of policies about hanging in, offering technical advice to these farmers so that they can make do with their small pieces of land. Trying to create some policies that addresses environmental degradation. And in the worst case scenario, try to put in measures that would enhance social protection measures against this group of citizens. In particular, we are thinking about conservation agriculture, which as some of my colleagues have already talked about, would be very key. And again, issues of viable outgrower schemes. If indeed the large-scale agriculture is the way to go, then we have to find creative ways in which we can create interface between the smallholder farmers and these large-scale investors. In terms of conclusion, what we are saying is that given what we have said, the future of smallholder farmers in Southern Africa look bleak if we hold everything constant. And I would argue that if nothing changes, they are really headed for extinction by 2050. And as I've already pointed out, in this particular context, we are looking at 3 factors that have really conspired to make the future of smallholder farmers quite challenging. The onslaught of local land grabs, subsidies skewing investments away from critical public goods, and the dominance of externally driven policy narratives which basically glorify large-scale farming as opposed to smallholder farming. But what we are saying really is that smallholder farmers are a necessary evil, especially given the stage at which most countries in Southern Africa are. But that would require innovative policy support in order to make smallholder farmers part of the solution. But what is very important for us is that when we are looking at the policies directed at improving the welfare of smallholder farmers, we should not just be looking at programming of spending, because that's what most governments in the region are doing through subsidies. I think robust policies that would make smallholders an integral part of the future require coordination, facilitation, and the flexibility. And finally, what we are saying is that it is important to recognize that there are several challenges that smallholder farmers themselves meet. Lack of organization. Yeah, it's very difficult for them to engage with the stakeholders out there as a unified block. There are often unintended consequences of policies that generally mean good for them. For example, the implementation of subsidies. Yeah, when you look on paper, the intentions are good, but practice often generates unintended consequences such as corruption, fraud, rent-seeking, theft. And then we are talking about dominant policy narratives at any particular point in time. And here we are talking about knowledge. Whose knowledge matter in moving the policy processes forward? Is it domestic knowledge? Is it international knowledge, etc., etc.? And then again, as countries that are dependent on aid, donor conditionalities really do matter. I've been to conferences in recent times. It's very difficult, extremely difficult to make a case for strong, to make a strong case for smallholder funding to donors. Most donors believe the age of smallholder farmers is gone. It's time for agriculture driven by the private sector.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Blessings. That was a really fascinating explanation of the political economy affecting the context of smallholder agriculture. Very interesting indeed. I think we just got time for one question. Claire Coote asks, how can smallholder farmers be supported or encouraged to work together? What kind of skills are necessary to facilitate this? And from me, what kind of influence or what kind of information could researchers in this area provide to policymakers in order that they could make informed decisions on these matters?
Thank you very much. These are difficult questions. Yeah, I think the culture of organization, especially amongst the most smallholder farmers, is essentially non-existent. And I will talk specifically for Malawi. The challenge really is that most smallholder farmers do struggle for subsistence. So issues of organization beyond their immediate needs for survival are considered things, abstract to them. So it becomes really difficult. So the entry point, of course, is to begin to engage them at that level so that they can begin to realize that what unites them is much bigger than their immediate individual interests. Because ideally, especially in the democratic context, they make a huge number. Yeah? They can easily come together to influence the decision-making processes. But because of these challenges, especially bordering on their daily subsistence, that makes it extremely difficult. Now, in terms of research, I think the problem is that most of the research that policy makers do consume is externally generated. It's not generated within these countries. Yeah, and that makes it extremely difficult. And against this backdrop, I would argue that probably this is the time for, I think, meaningful collaboration between researchers from the North and the researchers from the South, so that each party has feed into the research agenda on the basis of their understanding of the local context as well as the state of current international knowledge. So that interface, that cross-fertilization of ideas, if it were really to be translated into practice, I think it would, in my view, begin to change the nature of research outputs, including policy recommendations emerging therefrom. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for those good explanations. So our next speaker is Kolawole Adebayo from Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, Nigeria. He's also chair of the NGO Sliden Africa, Sustainable Livelihoods and Development Network for Africa. He's been collaborating with NRI for many years, and he's going to talk about the future of Africa smallholder farming.
I am going to draw from about 30 years of experience of working with smallholder farmers, and the last 25 years I've spent doing some academic work on smallholder farmers, particularly in Africa. It's been established that smallholder farmers constitute a very large population across the world. And every time we think of smallholder farmers, the characteristics that come to mind are that they are poor, food insecure, have limited access to markets and services. It also comes to mind that they have limited choices in terms of what they do. The things they can do in farming are limited. But despite that, they still feed most of the world's population. And they rely almost predominantly on family labor. There is data to show that between 60 and 70% of the food that is consumed in Kenya and Tanzania is produced by smallholder farmers. In many sub-Saharan African countries, the percentage is higher than this. In terms of technology uptake, the most common technology you find with smallholder farmers are fertilizers and seed, with which they intensify their production. But they live within a cycle of poverty that is linked with low input, low yield, low income, and therefore inability to afford input. So when technologies come in the form of input that smallholder farmers have to purchase, then they enter into this continuous cycle of poverty that keeps them low within the social system where they operate. To double that jeopardy is the declining soil fertility, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and the opportunities available for these smallholder farmers to attain the potential yield of the crops that they grow becomes challenged. Despite this, when compared to large-scale farmers, smallholder farmers still have higher yield per hectare. And this is because they use more input per hectare, particularly labor. They are more labor intensive in their operation. And because of the small size of the farms, supervision is easier. And then because workers are mostly family, they are also more motivated to work. So in almost all the countries that I have worked in, you find that the yield per hectare from smallholder farm are always higher. But as the food chains evolve and modern supermarkets are beginning to take control of the value chain for most agricultural commodities, then smallholder farmers began to be excluded. You find smallholder farmers predominantly in traditional markets. And the reason that smallholder farmers are being excluded from modern markets is that modern markets require them to have greater managerial skills, record keeping, labeling, and so on and so forth. Modern market also expect a kind of continuous flow of supply of commodities that smallholder farmers would have quite a bit of challenge meeting. And then concerns for food safety, certification, and quality requirements often tend to put smallholder farmers out of the more modern markets. Then agricultural research that used to be almost exclusively in the public purview is also increasingly becoming private. And this is tending to look for solutions to problems that are more relevant to larger scale farmers than small scale farmers. But why is it that smallholder farmers choose not to participate in the more modern market? One is the element of cost. There are increased transaction costs, particularly for transportation, for packaging, for labeling, for getting standards. Smallholder farmers, most of the time, cannot afford this additional cost of participation. Then because of their geographic dispersal over a large spread of land, they need to come together somehow. And that also is tantamount to additional costs. Supply is more inconsistent. They only supply small quantities, and most people who buy from them, therefore, consider the kind of margins that will cover the extra cost of buying from smallholder farmers rather than buying. Okay. So we are saying that smallholder farmers don't participate in markets, mainly because of the cost of such participation, but also there are concerns for quantity, quality, and food safety requirements that tend to favor larger scale farmers over small scale farmers. So because of this additional cost, smallholder farmers don't participate in modern market. Then in terms of mechanization, smallholder farmers do not have the luxury of spreading the cost involved in mechanization over either a large hectare of land or a long period of time. So smallholder farmers tend to combine more labor and less capital in their operation. And this is favorable to them because rural wages are low compared to the cost of mechanization. And for many smallholder farmers, combining manual labor with animal power is a cost-effective operation for them rather than investing in expensive machineries. Also, in terms of access to credit, most smallholder farmers are excluded from credit markets. Primarily, one, credit markets are sometimes missing, or most of the time missing, within the geographic vicinity of smallholder farmers. Commercial banks usually don't have rural branches, and when they do have these rural branches, they tend to be more rent-seeking than supporting the activities of smallholder farmers. This is even worse for women, particularly because women have less access to assets and therefore are unable to meet the collateral requirement that banks or more formal financial institutions require. When government try to offer financial packages such as subsidies that my colleague referred to, they tend to politicize this, and therefore a large chunk of smallholder farmers either don't benefit, or when they do benefit, it is unconnected with their farming activity and can be an additional financial burden for them. Then because smallholder farmers tend to sell at least a portion, if not all of their products immediately after harvest, they tend to get lower prices for their product. And this is because they have no other financial cushion when they harvest their product. And then finally, when there's a threat of shock, whether it's a global shock like a pandemic or earthquake, or even a more personal shock like the loss of a family member, it affects the smallholder farmer both from the business perspective and from the social and psychological perspective. So for them, financial exclusion is the order of the day. Even for extension services, the quality of extension services available to smallholder farmers is rather low. There have been studies in Ethiopia and Tanzania that shows a positive relationship between farm sizes and access to extension services. So the larger the farm sizes, the greater the access to extension services. And smallholder farmers need extension support. And the kind of support they need is possibly going to have to change as we go into the future. First, the production-oriented extension recommendations need to also take into consideration market orientation approach. We need to prioritize marketing in our extension messages, and then we need to also spread extension messages concerning food safety and linkages to agro industries. Now, do we need smallholder farmers in future? My absolute answer is yes, we do. And in fact, we do not have a choice. We We do not have a choice because smallholder farmers respond rather quickly and more effectively to food shortages. And when food insecurity is the order of the day, smallholder farmers are more likely to respond more quickly and more efficiently than larger ones because they are on site and able to distribute food rather quickly in their own micro environment. Beyond that is that they also offer employment to a large percentage of population, and that in itself is a reason why smallholder farmers will still continue to be needed in future. Now, when we are thinking of the future of smallholder farmers, we shouldn't think of their current status only. We need to think that the future of smallholder farmers can also be influenced by government, can also be influenced by economic development as we approach the future. We just need to note that there are behavioral features of smallholder farmers that can be changed by policy. So our education policy, health policy, public health policies can also influence the way the choices that smallholder farmers make in future. And these choices that they make in their personal life and their businesses are really not separable and interdependent. So going forward, as the economic environment improves, the circumstances of smallholder farmers may also improve. I take this quote from Bill Gates: innovations that are guided by smallholder farmers, adapted to local circumstances, and sustainable for the economy and environment will be necessary to ensure food security in the future. Before I go to the last slide, the world population is going to increase. We estimate that by 2050, will be more than 9 billion people on the planet Earth. This means that we need more food. And getting more food would be more difficult than it was in the past, because in addition to having to produce about 70% more food, we have to do it under conditions that are not as favorable as we did in the 70s and the 80s. Soil are failing, misuse of pesticides is destroying our biodiversity. So all of that would be additional challenge as we go into the future. And I think smallholder farmers will still be relevant in producing food for these almost 10 billion people. Sometimes people recommend that smallholder farmers could take advantage of economies of scale by forming cooperatives. And definitely cooperatives have their positive side of making it easy to reach smallholder farmers, aggregating their produce, as well as success in increasing the scale of operation of smallholder farmers. But at many times, cooperatives tend to deviate from their business objectives, and sometimes multiple roles in politics, social lives of the people tend to override their entrepreneurial spirit. And of course, there are instances of financial malpractices within cooperatives that have tended to tear away the body of cooperatives as a useful tool for bringing smallholder farmers together. Having said that, as we improve rural education and we have greater managerial skill among smallholder farmers, cooperative farming might still be relevant in the future. This is my final slide. Future challenges. We will still have a case of geographic and economic isolation for small farmers in the future. Land and water resources will continue to be stressed. Use of fertilizers and pesticides will continue to have a negative impact on our waterways. Irrigation practices affecting underground water will still be an issue that we need to contend with as smallholder farmers. The loss of biodiversity, as we focus on a few staples, will continue to be a challenge in the future. And in order to address all of this, we need to invest in rural education, and the returns to this could be higher. We need to also be able to provide more specific knowledge. I think the era of blanket recommendations would have to end about now. And as we go into the future, we need to have more specific recommendations for smaller groups of smallholder farmers. We need to improve the managerial skills of smallholder farmers so that they can be more active in the farmer sector, in the banking sector, in the financial sector, as well as utilize the extension advice available more productively. Then the productivity of labor needs to improve, as well as social protection for those external and internal shocks that might affect the life and business of smallholder farmers. Overall, there needs to be some structural transformation of the global economy. The productivity of labor in agriculture needs to increase. Rural income needs to increase. But as we do this, we need to start other sectors of the economy on a positive note, so that labor that is being let off of agriculture in the future would have employment and income from other sectors of the economy. Overall, sustained economic development for the economy as a whole will rub positively on smallholder farming. I can be reached on adebayo@funab.edu.ng. Thank you for listening.
Many thanks, Kola. That was a really comprehensive analysis and presentation. I particularly like the explanation of problems in farmers accessing modern markets and their partial exclusion from all forms of agricultural services. There's a number of questions, too many to ask right now. A couple of people are asking about mechanization. How can farmers, smallholder farmers, access mechanization? Is there a role for groups or cooperatives? Is there a role for credit provision in this area?
Okay, at the moment, I think there are a lot of challenges limiting the access of smallholder farmers to mechanization. And I think that aggregation of land holdings, ensuring contiguous availability of land to smallholder farmers could help. But that could only help a number of smallholder farmers. There are issues of terrain, particularly for smallholder farmers in the forest regions, where land preparation can be very expensive. But as I said in the presentation, if we think of mechanization from the perspective of improving labor productivity rather than tractorization, we might then be able to help smallholder farmers with smaller hand tools that could improve the efficiency of the labor that they currently use over time.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, we'll have to move on now. Thank you so much again. And the next presentation is from our last speaker, Jibreen, who is Professor of Soil Science and Director of the Center for Dryland Agriculture at Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria. Is he here?
So I will be talking from the perspective of what we are doing at the Center for Dryland Agriculture, working with the smallholder farmers. And I will start by giving a small background about the center, then I will talk about the work we're doing with smallholder farmers. The Center for Dryland Agriculture is in Bayero University, Kano, and the center is a regional center that takes students from across the dryland areas of Africa. We have student body across the length of the drylands of Africa, almost like the Great Green Wall. And this gives us opportunity to work through students with different stakeholders in the dryland areas. And the establishment of the center was born out of the need for the generation of knowledge to address many of the issues highlighted earlier in the previous presentations. Those issues are particularly more problematic in the dryland areas, where already we're having a lot of conflicts because of low productivity, and where most of the agriculture is done by resource poor farmers. So the Bayero University established this center to specifically focus on generating knowledge and research products that will address many of the issues in the drylands, which are directly issues related to the smallholder farmers. We run MSc and PhD programs and also short professional courses to address the skill needs in the region. Our short professional courses mostly target mid-career professionals such as extension agents that will go out to work on the field with smallholder farmers. And also we work with both public and private sector organizations to carry out R&D activities to address some of the issues. Our activities are, of course, multidisciplinary because in the production space, in the drylands, you find so many issues coming together. You have the crop production, you have livestock production, and you have the whole issue of managing the natural resources in the area. And very often, you have a lot of conflict because of the demands on various resources and the low productivity, leading to a lot of problems. Of recent, there is a lot of issues with herders and farmers in the dryland areas. We put in fairly good facilities for research, for development, and we work with several partners across the region to address some of the issues. And to put in context, smallholder farmers form the majority of agricultural producers in Africa. And this is even more so in the dryland areas. And most of their production is low technology based, mainly rain-fed agriculture with no irrigation. Their farmlands are often infertile and degraded because of unsustainable practices. They don't have much access to credits and inputs. And their lack of access to good inputs means that there is need for them to have better and more efficient outcome from the inputs they manage to get and use in their production, which brings some of the activities we do to sharp focus. They also have poor access to extension advice and poor access to markets. Very often they are shortchanged because they get very low prices for what they produce, mostly because of either lack of proper access to evacuate directly to markets in the bigger cities. And most often the yields are usually very, very low, below the potential of what they could get in those areas. So this forms a vicious cycle that makes it difficult for the smallholder farmer to reinvest in yield enhancing practices. There are quite a number of technologies that could be used to improve yields, but because of these vicious cycles, the smallholder farmer is not able to invest in those technologies, even when he has the knowledge, because he has other competing demands. And these are particularly serious issues when you come to the dryland areas. And the problems are likely going to be more problematic with the increasing trend in population globally. Most of the increase in the next 70 years or so is going to be in Africa and Asia. While Asia is beginning to stabilize, the population in Africa is still increasing exponentially. And it's particularly more so in Nigeria, which means there's going to be a lot more pressure on land in the future. There may be unsustainable practices. There will be more fragmentation of land because of this population pressure. Some of the activities we are doing working with smallholder farmers to address some of the problems is one, we identified management of soil fertility as a key issue. And along with our collaborators and external funding, we carried out a number of projects working with the farmers to develop tools that will provide better advice on fertilizer use. One of such projects is the Taking Maize Agronomy to Scale in Africa, which is a project we carried out in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And through the project, we developed a fertilizer recommendation tool that is targeted at providing location-specific fertilizer advice to smallholder farmers. The tool was developed in such a way that you can easily ask questions and some decision rules based on the resources of the farmer to give him advice so that he can get the best outcome from whatever fertilizer he has available. We also produce a number of agronomic practices, recommendations that the farmer can use to improve his yields. And the development of these tools was done in a very participatory way with the farmers and extension workers. We went through a lot of processes of identifying how best they want the tools, how it can be more easily useful to them, and so on, before we developed both the fertilizer recommendation and variety selector tools that we deployed to farmers. And presently, the tool is being used on thousands of farmers by one of the major extension agencies here in Nigeria, Sasakawa Global 2000. And also a fertilizer company, OCP, is using the tool to advise farmers to apply fertilizer more efficiently. We also worked with the private sector, the OCP fertilizer company, to carry out on-farm research along with farmers based on soil tests to generate 2 fertilizer blends that OCP has now developed and is going to be used as a location-specific fertilizer for 2 areas in Nigeria, which will ensure better yield per unit fertilizer product use for those farmers in those areas. We have also looked at seed as one of the issues affecting farmers. Farmers don't have good access to improved seeds, which results in some of the low productivity of their enterprise. And we thought it's for legumes, for example, which is important in improving soil fertility when you have integration into the system. Seed system can be developed that can be easily produced by the farmers. So through a project called Tropical Legumes 3, in which we worked with CRISAR and other partners, the project was funded by Gates Foundation. We trained various communities of smallholder farmers on how to produce improved legume seeds and make seeds available among those communities, which has greatly improved their productivity, especially for groundnut and cowpea. We've also have other programs working directly with the farmers to generate more location-specific recommendations that target the specific problems of the farmers instead of generic recommendations. These are projects we did with mostly external funding, but also to address the problems of farmers, you must have also some level of internal funding. We currently have a number of projects ongoing, which is funded by the Nigeria Research Fund under the Tertiary Education Research Fund, also specifically addressing key issues related to the productivity of smallholder farms. Some of these include closing yield gaps in Nigeria, Sudan, and Sahel Savannah through site-specific nutrient management. In this project, we are working with farmers across the dry areas to generate a fertilizer recommendation tool for sorghum, similar to what we did earlier with the maize variety, maize fertilizer recommendation tool. We are also looking at how to improve the productivity of rotation systems under irrigated areas. Presently, especially with some of the policies brought recently relating to rice production in Nigeria, there's a lot of attention on rice production, and most of the production is still done by smallholder farmers. However, there are also some emerging problems that are coming up. Because of the continuous rice after rice production, there are new pests and diseases that are emerging. There's a lot of nutrient mining going on and all sorts of issues. So we are working with farmers through one of the projects funded by National Research Funds to model the best rotation systems that can support sustainable intensification in some of these irrigated areas. So these are some of the projects we are doing through funding from the National Research Funds. Then coming to the question, will there be smallholder farmers by 2050? The obvious answer is yes, because of so many issues. First of all, the population trend is hinting towards fragmentation of lands in Africa. And there are very few opportunities, especially in the dry areas, that can absorb the growing population and the teeming youth. There are no emerging industries, not even much in agro-processing, that will give alternative livelihoods to many of these youth that are coming into the labor market, which means smallholder farming will still continue to be with us. And what we need to do to avoid crisis by 2050 is to find enabling policies that will improve the productivity of these smallholder farms. And one of them will be through greater R4D products and services targeted at improving the productivity of the farms. Some of the things we are doing are mostly funded by external sources who come with their demands and areas of focus. So the governments in Africa must be more focused in targeting research and development and ensuring that products and services are produced that look at the context of the farmers. One of the products areas could be in labor-saving devices. There should be appropriate devices that are within the context of the smallholder farmer. If you talk of, for example, large-scale mechanization is not going to be possible easily under smallholder conditions. But if you have easy-to-use handheld tools that are labor-saving, it will increase the productivity of smallholder farms. Also, there should be a much better extension coverage so that knowledge is, as it is being generated, is taken to the smallholder farmers easily. And of course, a better rural infrastructure needs to be put in place to provide access to markets for the products of the farmers. And very importantly, as the population is increasing, most of the younger people, if they are not engaged productively, they will go into crimes and more conflicts. And one of the best ways to engage them is in agriculture if they are properly mentored and they see possibility of income and good productivity in agriculture. And this can be done by provision of proper finance and adequate mentorship. All these things will require funds. And I think it's important for governments in Africa to follow through the Maputo Protocol of allocating at least 10% of their budget to agriculture. Also, there is need to invest in smart subsidies so that whatever subsidies governments are providing right now are targeted at the points where they will make a difference. For example, now fertilizer subsidies is often given to farmers through political office holders, but in most cases, it's not going directly to them. The products are sold at much higher prices in the market before it gets to the farmers. But government could target probably fertilizer companies and target those subsidies there and ensure that the products reaches the market at a specific price so that the farmer can easily purchase at a reasonable price. So these are some of my reflections on the smallholder farming by 2050 and some of the things we are doing directly with the farmers on the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jibreen. That was excellent. A good presentation of your work at the Drylands Agriculture Place and very comprehensive overview. Now, there's a couple of questions, I think. A number of people have been asking about the role of smallholder livestock keepers. And you mentioned livestock in your presentation and emerging challenges. Could you just say something quickly about how you see the future for smallholder livestock producers? Hello?
Yes, from the context of drylands particularly, smallholder livestock farming will continue to be there, especially small ruminants and poultry. But for large ruminants like cows through nomadism, I think the future is not there for that type of livestock production. And it should be a big focus of governments in Africa to think of how they can settle most of these nomadics in places where they will be able to produce feeds and store feeds for dry periods so that there is no much movement and conflicts with farmers. So certainly by 2050, I see still there will be smallholder livestock producers. I also see a lot of synergy between smallholder livestock producers and crop producers, which in most cases they do both. But also I don't see nomadism with cattle still being around by 2050.
Okay, I'm afraid we're very out of time and we'll have to stop there. I think that point is probably a matter for some debate and maybe picked up in the discussion later on. So I'd just like to thank all 5 presenters. I think we've had a real treat in terms of understanding the respective challenges and issues in smallholder agriculture and some different perspectives on what we might anticipate in the future. So thank you very much again, and I'll hand over to Yoni and Jeremy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Adrienne, and also thanks a lot to all the invited speakers. We had a lot of interesting thoughts there, a lot of common views, but also some contrasting views. So that's really interesting. Now we will move to the second sub-session, and that will be moderated by Jeremy. So please go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, thank you, Jonna. Are we just going to move straight through without the 5-minute break, or we assume people have? Yeah,
I think given the fact that we are running a bit out of time.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you, all the presenters. I think there's a few phrases in the presentations just now that will stick with me. I think smallholder farmers being a necessary evil, but in danger of extinction, I think will remain with me for a while. But certainly much food for thought there from those great presentations. So now we'd like to move on to obviously, so within NRI, we've been thinking a lot about the future of farming, the future of smallholders, and and agriculture, its economic, environmental, and food security role. And we've been sort of putting together some ideas about our perspectives on sustainable agriculture intensification that we would like to share with the audience and get your feedback on. And so Yona and Laxmi have prepared a presentation on this, and so without more ado, I will pass over to, I think Yona will present first and Laxmi will finish off. And if you have questions, then please put those in the chat. I'm hoping we'll have time for a more open discussion where people can actually use mics, but let's see how we go.
Well, thanks. Sorry for that technical hold up. As Jeremy explained, we have been working in the past weeks and months on a paper trying to develop to put our views on sustainable agricultural intensification on paper, trying to develop the way we see that we can contribute to that, and then specifically focused on the South. So my co-authors are Laxmi and Jeremy, and my co-presenter is Laxmi. So the title of our presentation is Sustainable Agricultural Intensification of Smallholder Family Farms in the Tropics, Views and Roles of the Natural Resources Institute. It should really be regarded as a first draft of our position in this debate, because this presentation is only put together by a few of the NRI staff members. And so it is really meant to incite some interesting discussions, which I hope it does. So we first briefly explain why sustainable intensification is urgently required. And we will explain the geographic and the farm typology focus that we are taking here. We will explain a little bit about the contestation in terms of terminology and approaches and how it could be achieved, and then we will focus a little bit more on what we see as a potential role in this. And then when I say our potential role, then I'm referring to the NRI, but of course also the partners of NRI, so NRI and its partnership altogether. So yeah, we have seen in the previous presentations already that that agriculture is a major driver of global environmental changes. It is responsible for pollution and degradation of land, and pollution of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. And at the same time, the world population is increasing, so there's a demand on agricultural production. So we need to increase the agricultural production rather than decrease it, but we have to do that with a much lower footprint. So smallholder agricultural farms do not contribute much to global environmental change, but they bear an unfair burden of the climate changes like droughts and floods. And they play a pivotal role in the global provisioning of agricultural produce. There were different numbers that have been presented by the previous authors, but I go by some of the numbers that are named in the references that you can see below. 98% of all farms globally are smallholder farmers that have less than 2 hectares of land. And that means an estimated number of 470 million farms worldwide. Yet they have they're only responsible for less than 1/3 of the global production. But primarily, well, just because of their sheer number, but also because of their important presence in the South, they are a pivotal. They're of pivotal importance when you talk about sustainable agricultural intensification. So there are different views of what SAI, sustainable agricultural intensification, is or should be, and there are also different terms to refer to it. Some thinkers they go by a more productivist approach, really focusing on the yield gaps. Others are taking a post-productivist approach. So the first is more like a technological approach of sustainable intensification or sustainable agricultural intensification, whereas the second group of thinkers are taking a more agroecological approach that favor, that involves ecosystem services and health services and social services, and not viewing smallholder family farms as production units. So at NRI, we have recently worked on and published a paper where we also defined what we see as sustainable agricultural intensification, and we came up with this definition here shown in pink as a multidimensional outcome of increasing agricultural productivity while safeguarding the social, economic, and environmental sustainability dimensions, which in each in their own right encompass multiple elements. So within NRI, we have and of course, the colleagues of NRI will know this, but this is more for our partners. We have a development program called Sustainable Agricultural Intensification, and the view of our program is to move beyond the twin goal of increasing productivity with minimized environmental impact by also including the conservation of livelihoods and well-being of smallholder family farms. And we do this, or we aim to achieve that by contributing to the development of farming systems using resources more efficiently, whilst increasing their production as well as their ecosystem services and their environmental and social resilience, and also reducing crop losses. Second theme is and aim of the program is to understand and integrate the perspectives of the different farmer and stakeholder categories regarding barriers and incentives, as well as equitable benefits. I don't know if you see what I see, but I see a blue line across my slide. I don't know how that came about. So after this definition of terms and aims to come, we have to talk about the implementation of SAI. How can sustainable agricultural intensification be achieved? Of course, this is a topic of a debate that is going on for quite some time among agricultural research for development professionals. So we don't, of course, pretend that we know the answer, if there is even one type of answer. But we have thought about what the problem really is and what could be a possible way to get out of that. So if you talk about sustainable agricultural intensification in the South, then an important pathway is development-oriented agronomy. So, development-oriented agronomy is a field of agronomy whereby not just the agronomic solutions are considered, but also the environmental and the social development goals are considered. Because of this, the rise of this notion that the environmental and social development goals should also be considered. There have also been in the last decades an increase in the number of stakeholders. A multitude of stakeholders and actors have been involved in sustainable agricultural intensification efforts in the South. A lot of external organizations and donor agencies. And with that, the development-oriented agronomy has become a little bit more political and sometimes also biased. And sometimes what we observe is that what the organizations and actors are promoting or sometimes pushing does not really take into account what smallholders really need. So the smallholder interests have become sometimes less relevant. I'm bluntly generalizing now, of course, but just to make a bit of a statement. Examples of this are the promotion of conservation agriculture, CA, and for instance, system of rice intensification, very similar type of promotion behind that in Africa. Without a consideration of our needs or the specific contexts, the environments where it has been promoted. So this has led to, well, low adaptation of the solutions to the environment, be it socioeconomic or environmental, biophysical environments, and consequently also to a low adoption by smallholder farmers. So what is a possible solution to this? Well, we believe that in response to this, a smallholder-led sustainable agricultural intensification approach based on co-creation, ownership and understanding of the smallholder, and intrinsic conviction of the direction and understanding of the approach could work possibly better. And this could be sparked by one or two relatively simple, relevant innovations, and then gradually moving towards more complex systems. And this is depicted here in this figure, moving from one innovation or one targeting one problem. For instance, here is the problem of striga and sorghum systems, and then inclusion of, for instance, trees or allowing trees on farms, the inclusion of cover crops, the inclusion of cattle, and gradually moving towards more farm complexity. An example of this type of approach is for instance, the farmer-managed natural regeneration of trees on farms in the semi-arid tropics of Africa, that combined allowing or planting indigenous trees on farms with water harvesting techniques, and this led to the so-called regreening of parts of the Sahel. So it should be more indigenous, it should be based more on co-creation and local ownership, and it should also have local relevance. So how can we as NRI and our partners contribute to such an approach? We think that we should, we propose a three-pronged approach in a stepwise and iterative process. The first step or stage would be generating solutions based on plant and animal ecology and biology. Secondly would be to co-design and guide the development of locally adaptable systems. And then the third would be mainstreaming sustainable intensification by exposing and encouraging and facilitating farmer experimentation, but also by capacity building and things like that. So the first step is typically something where we feel that NRI is quite well placed as an important contributor. For the second step, the co-design and guidance, as a UK-based institute, NRI is perhaps not the best place, but here we really rely on our southern partners. And then for the third stage, this would then imply the mainstreaming of SAI solutions and systems. And NRI already works on innovation systems and communication technologies, as well as training of future agricultural research for development professionals. And then, so we can really contribute to that as well, but again, in close collaboration with our southern partners. So an example of the first step is the generating solutions based on plant and animal ecology and biology is, for instance, our work on multi-purpose cover crops that can both provide food or fodder, but also protect the soil, so also plays a role in soil management and soil conservation. And sometimes we have identified cover crops that also identify other, like biotic constraints, such as striga, for instance. We also work on field margin diversity, inclusion of plant species that attract natural pests, enemies, and pollinators. Also, what has been shown by Angela in the previous presentation, work on botanicals from locally grown plants as pesticides. And we also work on striga-resistant tolerant germplasm combined with targeted and smaller quantities of fertilizer. So these are some of these solutions that we work on. And here I am depicting what could be the approach in the co-designing and guiding the development of locally adaptable systems. This is a hugely oversimplified representation, of course, but I think it shows a bit how we could perhaps get to adapted and relevant systems, locally adapted and locally relevant systems. So it would follow a farmer participatory approach, and it would integrate locally relevant solutions in a stepwise and iterative approach, and then along the way evaluate the effectiveness and affordability and feasibility, but also the risks that are involved with each component. So on the x-axis here, you can see the time, the cropping seasons, and then on the y-axis you can see the number of SAI components that are being integrated in a stepwise manner. So, for instance, well, we have shown here different types of farms. Here there is a farm, the blue, if you follow just the blue line, that's a farm, a lowland rice farm in Africa, for instance, exposed to the system of rice intensification with a lot of different components. If this farmer would start with alternate wetting and drying, AWD, and the use of compost, and all this to improve, for instance, as a first target, the water productivity, then perhaps in later seasons, the farmer can integrate row transplanting and the use of a rotary weeder to reduce herbicide inputs. A next step would then be early transplanting to improve yields. Perhaps in another season, or perhaps in the same season, involve or select weed competitive variety, because with alternate wetting and drying you will have more weed problems. And then, for instance, integrating judicious use of fertilizers, but then perhaps also as the farmer evolves in time and the system evolves over time, perhaps at one point the farmer would say, well, I can no longer continue with these large quantities of compost, or I have competitive claims of those composts for other systems, and then gradually the farmer can decide to also disadopt one of these components. So it should be an iterative and ongoing process of adaptation and improvement of the specific farm management.
Jonna, we need to go a little bit faster. We've already had about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I will proceed. So what you will end up with is for different farms, a different number of side components, and so different levels of complexity for different farms. So really locally adapted. Of course, achieving this is quite a challenge, and it is a time-consuming and very energy demanding process that requires a lot of local and personal attention. So the next slides will be presented by Laxmi. Laxmi, if you are there.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
thank you, Anna. The third element of our three-pronged approach is mainstreaming, and it involves generating impact at scale. So we are talking about how we can upscale and outscale, SAI pathways, approaches, and methodology at scale. And this implies imposing a smallholder to SAI solutions, organizing and learning, platforms, and building capacity of multiple stakeholders and training future leaders and researchers. So again, NRI relies heavily on our southern partners to contribute in a meaningful way in this process. And then we could be, we could be a part of collaborative teams with southern partners in mainstreaming, dissemination, and including the co-design of some extension technologies, including design and use of ICT solutions. Next slide, please. And we are also conscious that mainstreaming can be a paradoxical process. As we have seen in widely promoted SAI practices such as conservation agriculture and system of rice intensification, the core values and principles of these practices are often lost in the mainstreaming process. So we need to be careful about that as well. And the good example is the chemical control of wheat in no-till or minimum tillage wheat cultivation. It can be a niche market for herbicide companies, and it can involve large-scale commercial agriculture. And mainstreaming process can be incremental as well as transformational. And when small incremental changes are not enough, transformational changes are required to increase the productivity and sustainability of smallholder family farms. Next, please. And this conceptual framework diagram shows a summary of what SAI comprises, and it shows how sustainable agricultural intensification pathways can look like. And it includes a range of actors, processes, and outcomes. And it can result into outcomes in terms of social, political, environmental, and economic achievements of sustainable intensification. Next, please. And in conclusion, we see that sustainable intensification at three levels: the goal, approaches, and the farm level experimentation. And as SAI as goal in NRI's views should be focusing on three rather than two objectives. That includes productivity, increase environmental conservation, and social well-being and livelihood promotion. And at the when we look at SAI as solution or approaches, we should meet 4 main criteria. The technology should be locally relevant and effective, and local adaptation should also be considered. And then we should also look at the enabling institutional environment. And then finally, there should be local ownership of the co-design process and the outcomes. And at the farm level, SAI pathways should follow an reiterative, stepwise approach through the co-design of solutions with local stakeholders, primarily smallholder farmers. And this is how we see, we find our SAI approach more relevant to our southern partners and smallholder farmers. Thank you.
So this is our paper so far, and it's put together by a small group of staff members only. So, and we have not yet considered views of our partners. So it's really like a first step, and it's really meant to incite discussion. So we have a little bit of time left for discussion, much less than we hoped so. But yeah, please go ahead with questions and your comments.
Yes, thank you, Jonna and Laxmi. And yes, so we'd welcome comment maybe on the, so Jonna and Laxmi have presented sort of 3 areas of intervention around sort of technology development, about participatory adaptation, and then mainstreaming and upscaling adoption, and obviously elaborated content there. So I don't know if people have any comments about whether those are 3 appropriate stages or groupings of activities, or whether they're things that are being missed out, or any other comments. Maybe while you're thinking of that, there is one in the chat on that when in considering the impacts of, say, sustainable rice intensification, would you also consider the impacts on, so say, malaria vector mosquitoes, or only look at the rice cultivation system itself? Jonna, you're muted if you're wanting to.
Yeah, I'm muted, yeah. I was looking at the bottom. Yeah, our view is really to have a holistic approach. So it should include the farmer or stakeholder, in this case, farmer well-being as well. So that also includes the farmer's health issues. So if health issues are really directly related to management or innovations, then that should really be taken into account when and these risks should also be transparently discussed with the smallholders when you are discussing or explaining certain pathways of innovation. You have to explain the risks that are involved, or the trade-offs that are involved in these innovations, and search collaboratively for solutions.
Yes, thanks, Jonna. So that was one of the, when we were developing the concept, it was, we felt that the technologies or any kind of interventions should be judged by their outcomes, be that in terms of agricultural production, economic output, environmental impacts, but also social and welfare and livelihood impacts. And there may almost inevitably be some, those are all multidimensional themselves, and there'll almost inevitably be some trade-offs between them, but at the very least you should be trying to recognize what those are and how to help decisions around them. So I think we have something in the chat here.
Yeah, I think there's a question from Angela.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for raising this question, Angela. That's why we call the mainstreaming is a paradoxical process. We have to be very careful, and small incremental changes may still be helpful for smallholder farmers. And when we mainstream and try to transform at the bigger level, we should also consider environmental as well as social consequences of those kind of transformation that we are aiming, with the pretext that smallholder farmers are not productive.
Yes, indeed. So then I think maybe there's another question here about the importance of soft skills in building farmers and their organizations and how that fits with the model.
Okay, maybe I can answer that. When we talk about mainstreaming, we are talking about learning and innovation platforms. That would be one way to look at how we empower multiple stakeholders. And again, innovation platforms are not neutral place. There may be winners and losers. We may try to bring powerful stakeholders together with voiceless and powerless stakeholders. So our role as researchers and development practitioners would be to facilitate that process and recognize there are controversy and differences in learning and innovation platforms.
Thank you. Sorry, stuff is coming in through the chat now. Okay. So Sarah is asking us, where does local and indigenous knowledge fit into this? I don't know, Jonna, perhaps you would like to take that one?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think what we propose is really nothing new in terms of farm participatory approaches. So when the first thing you would do is to talk with farm communities, like to talk through the context of what the challenges are and the needs and the requirements. Part of and the next step would be like discussing what kind of solutions there are. So not having already preset ideas about what the solutions could be, and then discussing with farmers would also involve what they themselves see as potential solutions, and then try to go to instigate to start a process of experiential learning with these farmers, where you can test different innovations on demonstration farms or on farms of those participating farmers themselves, see what works best, and also use counter good controls to see if it is really adding to the solution. So in my view, indigenous knowledge and local innovations would really be part of this approach.
Thank you, Jonna. Then from Rolando, asking about in the mainstreaming and upscaling about the use of establishment and monitoring of integral farms as demonstrations for farmers on the benefits of SAI, and then also the importance of integrating young farmers into the process.
Yeah, youth, maybe I can take the turn.
Yes, go ahead.
Youth engagement in farming has become a very important issue in international development. Unless we reduce drudgeries and make farming more, respectable, youth may not continue working on their farms. They may be looking at, employment elsewhere. My parents never asked me to stay on farm. They always asked me, go to university, look for better jobs. They knew that the hard life they could make from smallholder family farms. So the point here is that how we can make that more, respectable and more economic in terms of small scale mechanization could be one way to make that attractive. This discussion came earlier as well. We are not talking about large scale mechanization here. That we have seen in the past, the flatland bias of mechanization, and we can develop small tools and small machines that smallholders can afford and operate on narrow terraces. our slopy land.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a question from Mofa about how do we incorporate the aspects of scale from plot to farm to landscape within the framework? How do those relate to the areas of intervention you've presented?
Yeah, I don't really have a thought through answer to that. I think it's really important that we include and that we consider the different scales. I mean, problems that are observed on the farm level are probably not isolated to the farm level. They come from, well, they're integrated in the landscape, or they're integrated in farming households and communities and the landscape level. So, and also the solutions. So it's, yeah, that's something that we need to consider. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we need to work that out a little bit more. I mean, if there are ideas about how to do that, then I would welcome that. The approach that we have presented here is indeed more looking at per farm level, but it does not include other levels, I suppose, but it will perhaps need a bit more thinking. I suppose that many of these approaches could also be working at a larger level, at a higher level, I would say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess there's a degree to which sort of the technological intervention is mostly, starts off at least at plot level, and then in the adaptation is when it gets integrated in the farm system, and then the mainstreaming takes it to landscape. But that's probably a slightly too simplistic view of it. I think it's almost certainly more complex than that. Okay, so yes, I think there's a few more comments in the chat about the importance of presentations to present to policymakers to promote the importance of smallholder farmers. I think some of Cola's earlier points would be on the higher productivity from smallholders would be very valuable there. Lucy asks whether the three-step process is new or has it been used previously?
I don't know if it's new or if it has been. I assume with so many R4D professionals out there, I'm sure that other organizations are perhaps envision the same type of approach. We have come up with this approach to really highlight that we work in and how they communicate with one another. And so it's also, for us, it's also, I think it was instrumental in positioning our role in this. Because we are a UK-based institute, there's lots of this that we cannot really do ourselves. So, and that's also not the point, of course, but yeah, it's important to consider what our contribution could be in this whole idea, and need to work with partnerships. I think for that, splitting it up in these three steps is actually quite useful. But whether it is new or not, that I won't be able to say.
Okay, thanks, Jonna.
I also don't think, okay, sorry.
Right. Yeah, then we have a question about the role of farmer leaders or influencers or farmer innovators maybe as well, whether they would help enable a faster uptake of some of the solutions. How to engage them?
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's also, I think, from what I remember or what I understood from the farmer-managed natural regeneration, one of the success the drivers for success of that approach was that it came from a champion farmer, or perhaps several champion farmers, who started with allowing regenerating trees on their farm and then building onto that. So I think identifying and working with champion farmers may be quite a good approach.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, Lucy points out in Europe, some farmers are way ahead of research and extension services in terms of innovation. I would say from my experience, not only in Europe, but anyway, in many parts of the world.
The next topic will be, will there be smallholders in 2050, but will there be agricultural researchers?
Yes, yes. But I think we're also aware that, yeah, we also know farmers who have been, yes, who have been drawn into ways of farming that perhaps have not met their expectations as well. So I think there's, anyway, I think there's two sides to that very, if you like, free market liberal approach to innovation. Okay, so we've gone over by about 5 minutes, I think, which hopefully is okay with everybody. We still have, yes, we've got about 60 people online. So yes, I think perhaps we should wrap up there. And thank you all to the presenters this afternoon. And, I think we, perhaps from the earlier presentations and thinking through, I think if we think about the fate of smallholder, what would be the status of smallholder farmers for 2050? On the one hand, it could be that those are the farmers who've been left out and sidelined by development. They were too poor to improve their livelihoods, and those are the been sidelined by the rest of the world. Or we could have a future of smallholder farmers in 2050, where those are the ones who have succeeded, have improved their production systems, developed their livelihoods, are feeding their family, are healthy and sending their children to school. And I think hopefully some of the things we've talked about will enable us to all to contribute more towards the second scenario and rather than the first. And thank you for everybody. And I don't know if anybody else would like to add anything, but thank you all for your contributions.
I think those were nice last words. So it brings us to the end of this session on sustainable agricultural intensification. I hope you have all enjoyed the presentations and the discussions that we had. The presentation has been recorded, so we will make sure that it is uploaded somewhere and available to everyone. Yeah, we will also report back to within NRI, and we will take the thoughts and the comments also from the chat into consideration when we are improving this our view and role in this paper. So thank you very much for your contributions, and yeah, I hope to see you in the next meeting on within the fancy conference and other occasions.